Good evening, everybody. Come on, there's still room. Yo, yo. Alan. Come on in, there's still seats. Alrighty. So we're almost at the end of DevOps. We've had a few shocks today as well, the loss of the Java posse. So I'm sure we're all a bit sad and a bit stressed at this stage. So I'd just like everybody please to stand up. Just please stand up. It'll only take 10 seconds. I want everybody to have a nice long stretch in the air. And hold. And breathe in. And breathe out. And sit back down again. Unlike my previous talks here at DevOps, this is actually going to be nice and relaxing. It's going to be calm. There won't be much swearing or carrying on as per normal. I've mellowed in my old age. I even nearly took my hat off. This is a very different talk. It's primarily a storytelling talk. So unfortunately, you will have to pay a little bit of attention to what I'm saying, as opposed to snuggling in that nice, comfortable seat and falling asleep. I've learned a lot recently off working with peers from Oracle that you need to have as many legal slides in your presentations as possible. So this is my interpretation of the legal slide. Unfortunately, my co-speaker, Chi, could not be with us here today. Unfortunately, due to work commitments, he is stuck in the United States of America. Chi is actually the creator of the codelesscode.com, and I highly recommend you, after this talk, go visit his website and see the several hundred koans along with illustrations that he has created. It's absolutely fantastic piece of work, and he's very kindly allowed me to give some of his stories here at DevOps. For those of you who don't know me, I'm normally known as a Diabolical Developer. I tend to rant about methodology and other software practices, but on recent trips to different countries, I have since mellowed out and become much more philosophical in my approach. So we've had a lot of talks here at DevOps about some pretty advanced topics. There's the latest Docker stuff, there's Java 8 things, Angular, I don't know if there even was an Angular talk this time around actually, but lots of modern stuff, lots of deep dive technical stuff, lots of interesting startup talks. This talk is going to go right back to the very basics of software development, just some really boring basic day-to-day things that you hope you yourselves do, or maybe you'll recognize that you don't, and you will be enlightened. So I'm going to talk about some coding things to start with. Such things as the small stuff and the naming of names, all very important. And I'll get into the first story straight away. So in the Laughing Monkey Clan, the Master Wu was sitting at a whiteboard, much like many of you here do when you're trying to solve a problem. And there were long streams of code on the whiteboard, and the master had been sitting there for 3 days looking at one line of code, one setting of a Boolean value. A novice came in on day 3, knocked politely on the door and asked Master Wu, "Master, you always tell us to have perspective. You always tell us to think of the big picture. Why do you sit here wasting 3 days looking over this one small bug?" The master turned, stood up, grabbed his staff, and promptly brought it down on the small toe of the novice. The novice hobbled out of the master's room and was enlightened. Small things matter. They really, really matter, especially in software development, especially in programming. The amount of times I've run across a bug because someone forgot to put a type on something, or somebody returned an incorrect Boolean value, so on and so forth, it still far outweighs there being a genuine bug, say, in the JVM or the application framework you're happening to use. So a bit of a question for you here in the audience. What is that logger statement going to produce as an answer? Does anybody know? Who's going to be brave? Shout it out. Yes, sir, in the back. 2 zeros, did you say? Very good. Now, to a novice developer, or to a person who, say, uses a language like JavaScript or some other dirty, dynamic, untyped, unsafe, horrible language, the sort of things, the small stuff matters. And for this poor developer, they perhaps didn't get the result they expected. Other small things that really matter, declaring your member variables final. Other small things that matter is making sure you log things correctly. Other small things that matter are things like checking for null. All very basic small things that a lot of us experienced developers sort of stop doing after a while. We stop doing the small things. An excellent practical piece of advice I can give is if you don't already own a copy of Effective Java by Joshua Block, 2nd edition, please do go out and go get it. And it covers about a good 60 or 70 small things that you need to think about always doing in Java. Because if you don't do those small things, big problems like having a broken foot happen. Go on to the next story. The next story was at the Crawling Spider Clan, where the young novice, we shall call him Bruce, constantly made all of his member variables public, open to the world. And day after day, he refused to change his code. He refused to make them private and have them accessed appropriately. So, Master Joanne invited him for lunch and said, "Please sit with me, young novice, Bruce. We have not yet had lunch together." And Bruce said, "This is a great honour, Master Joanne." Master Joanne proceeded to pick up a pair of chopsticks and started to feed herself with rice from the bowl. And then pointed at the young monk's stomach and said, "Clearly we must feed you through that public member variable you have there. I shall just go get a sharp knife and we can continue with our lunch." The young monk ran out of the room, enlightened. So here we have some of the young monk's code with his public stomach variable, not very helpful. And here we are using such thing. And this is a real trap for new developers to the Java language or any other language that has this concept of protected, private, public, whatever you want to call it. Because the naive developer will use autocomplete in their IDE because we're all lazy, and they will by default start doing the wrong thing. So instead of feeding the monk through the mouth, the monk gets fed through the stomach. And this is the error message that comes out. Not very helpful. Case number 6. 2 monks were brought before the master. There had been a null pointer exception in production, and the villagers were most unhappy, and they were refusing to pay the monks for their hard work. So Master Wu grabbed novice, call them maybe Stefan this time. By the way, the names are completely coincidental. We'll say novice Stefan and novice James. If James is here in the room, there's probably a James somewhere. So James is the junior monk, Stefan the senior. And James the junior held his head in shame and said, "I am sorry, master. I should have checked for the null first." And the senior monk cried out, "Yes, you young fool. It was clearly documented in my Java doc that my method could return null." The master told the young monk, "You must sit under the tree and have no food for 3 days as penance." And he said to the senior monk, "You're fired." So, told you this would be back to basics talk. Initializing collections and things to null and allowing your methods to return null is evil. You are causing great harm to your fellow programmers who either have to write really annoying check if this thing is null everywhere code, and unfortunately Java still doesn't have truly nice native support for null checking. We're hopefully going to convince Brian and co to give it to us for Java 9. We will see. There is actually a whiteboard survey out for the next Java feature you'd like to see out in the main hall. I suggest you put a stripe next to the "we want to be able to have a null check" as part of Java. So please always initialize your collections and your variables to something that is not null, because null pointer exceptions are runtime exceptions and are like little demons running through your code. Next story. No, not really a story. You want to stand on the shoulders of giants in this industry. Okay, there's an awful lot of not invented here syndrome that goes on, and if you want to be able to build products and services and things effectively and quickly, it behooves yourself to look at other open source projects, look at the latest bits of technology that are coming out, and see what's out there and start using it. Don't write your own web framework, for crying out loud. And I had another customer doing still that last week. It's absolutely insane. But don't follow blindly either. Look at what this new technology does. Look at how it actually impacts you. We'll look here quickly at a small piece of Java 8 code. You'll see here that we now have this lovely ability, if the laser pointer is working, there we go, where we can get a bunch of names, turn it into a Java 8 stream. Streams are awesome, because they're lazily evaluated and we can do cool stuff with them and throw in lambdas as well. So we're going to filter here on, name starts with foo. And we saw this cool new parallel stream fancy feature, so we'll just automatically go implement that. And a customer of ours actually did this, went away and parallel streamed their entire code base. And their code ran more slowly in production. And they did not understand why. All their production machines were single core boxes, so going parallel was absolutely pointless. So if you are going to adopt a new feature, think very carefully about the ins and outs of that new feature. The next story is about Nun Trish. Nun Trish had this wonderful habit of using magic numbers in her code. And upon being chastised by Master Wu, she said, but short codes and short numbers take up less source code, less space, and I can always interpret them doing something later. Master Wu sort of nodded and smiled, walked away, and the next morning left her this note. So magic numbers are also an evil that people should not do, hopefully. We see a habit as well of a lot of people using magic strings. Strings have no semantic meaning. Okay? Please use enums if you think you're going to use strings as some sort of a constant or some sort of an actual real value. My favorite, the naming of names. This is a story where one of the abbesses went into the kitchen and saw that the young group of monks in their first year at coding school were all cooking in the kitchen together, and they called everything a thing. Please go pass me the thing. Oh, the thing over there under the thing, if you could just throw that thing to me, that would be really useful. And they thought they were being very clever because they had their own secret language. And the 4 or 5 young monks thought it was a wonderful game, that the cooks could not understand them because they constantly used this name of thing. So the abbess stood there waiting in the kitchen patiently until one of the young monks asked her, "Please, abbess, could you pass the thing over there?" thinking she would join in the game. So she promptly handed him the hottest boiling pot she could, and the monk was enlightened. So naming of names is very, very important, and especially in a language such as Java, which tries to be object-oriented. A lot of purists claim that it's not truly, but there you have it. We talk about verbs and nouns, so I'm sure you all had your grammar teachers in high school and university beating this into you. For some reason, programmers seem to want to revert back to very old bad habits when they leave university and leave high school. I almost wish I could have my old English teacher sitting with my team at times, just gently reminding them the proper use of the English language inside computer programs. So, in Java, you want to name your classes as nouns. You want to name those things. And methods are doing things, they are actions, not the other way around. If you want to do this fancy other way around stuff, there are other programming languages for that. Go and use them. More naming of names. Who here has been guilty of calling a variable X? Or Y? Yes. I know. It's a secret guilty pleasure, isn't it? Sometimes I do it just to mess with my colleagues, just for fun. And then I don't let them use an IDE to refactor. Just give them Vi. It's great. Obviously, please don't do that. We actually had a customer's production system go down for about 2 hours. And the root cause of the problem was a piece of source code that had H22 divided by Y9 when it should have been divided by Y10. Absolute insanity. So this still happens out there today. Next bit of naming, and I'm going to pick on people who present about lambdas a lot here. I see an awful lot of this. Come on, little laser pointer. No, laser pointer has died. Never mind. You can see up there the little n. What on earth is n? N is nothing. Give it a name. In fact, call it name, because that is what it is. Same with exceptions. Everybody loves just to use E. E doesn't actually help the person coming in after you figure out what that exception, what the context of that exception is, especially in a long block of code, especially if they're only using Vi, and that's all they have to read. So in this particular case, how about calling that a deleted file exception, or something that gives it context? I shall now pick on the topic of testing. We're going for time. We're going great for time. Fantastic. So, let me just try and recall this. Yes. Who here still does manual testing? Yeah? Oh wow, that's a lot of you. Who here also, and this can be true for both sides, who here does automated testing? Wow, that's really impressive. So the story here is the young monks and nuns of the Laughing Monkey Clan were complaining to their elders. Manual testing is too time intensive, they said. It is taking too long, and we have to hire many, many uneducated peasants from the village to come and do our manual testing. And they push on the buttons, they bash their paws on the keyboard. And sometimes we get good results, and sometimes they're not consistent. It is not a good way. On the other hand, automated tests. On each project, we spend 90% of our time writing automated tests, and almost none on the real production code. This is not efficient. There must be a better way. And one of the masters stood up and said, well, yes. If you can reasonably prove that all of your code is absolutely correct, then there would be no need to write tests. Who here has done formal methods of computer science at university, where you do stupid things like prove that a for loop is actually going to end, or prove that 1 + 1 really equals 2? 4-page proof, I kid you not. So some of the elders started to debate this idea. Could we prove that our code works at all times? Through diligent study, perhaps, said one. Maybe if we invoke the right sacrifices to gods, said the other. And the most eldest of monks with the long white beard said, I believe I can come up with the right answer to this. If I think of the correct words at the right time, when the conditions are perfect, I will have an answer for you all. And a young monk stood there and bowed. Elder, how long do you think that will take? This will be revolutionary. Only about 100 years, said the elder monk. Ooh, that confused you, didn't it? So, the story here is there is no right answer. Automate what you can automate and do it in a fashion where it's not taking up your entire development time. And unfortunately, yes, still manually test what you have to manually test, in particular the things that matter to humans like user interfaces and user experience. No automated test telling you that you have a div on your HTML page nested 3 deep is going to tell you that the user absolutely hates using where you've gone and placed that. So there's a time and place for both. This is one of my favourite stories, and I'm going to pick on... Is Trish in the room? No, good, I can pick on her, good. So, the crawling spider clan was most honoured. They were to receive a visit from the most holy emperor himself. So all of the masters gathered the young monks and the young nuns and said to them, we must scrub this place clean. The paths must be cleared. Everything must be in order for when the holy emperor arrives. Master Hu pointed at one young monk, we shall call him Ben, and pointed at another young nun, Trisha, and said, you two are responsible for cleaning out the 2 koi ponds, for the emperor is most pleased with beautiful fish. The koi ponds were muddy and disgusting and had not been looked after well, because first-year monks and nuns would often throw impromptu parties and throw beer bottles and things in the waters. Tisk, tisk, tisk. The emperor was to arrive in 2 days. So, Monk Ben diligently got to work straight away, grabbed a shovel, grabbed a net, and jumped into the first koi pond and started digging away frantically. Meanwhile, Trisha looked around the environment of the second koi pond and noticed there was a stream running closely by. She smiled to herself, sat down under a shady tree, and did nothing. 24 hours later, Master Hu came past and praised young Ben. He was clearly doing very well. The beer bottles were all neatly thrown away. The water was still muddy, but the koi were coming back, and one looked like it was even vaguely alive. He then berated Nun Trish, said, you are lazy and insolent, and you sit under that tree and do nothing. If the emperor is not happy, the punishment will be most severe. Trish looked up from her book that she was reading, Introduction to Scala, nodded and smiled and said, all will be in readiness, master, I promise. Day number 2 arrived, and there was only an hour left to go. Ben, at this stage, had collapsed from exhaustion and was carried off on a stretcher to the infirmary. His koi pond was almost complete, and Master Hu quickly grabbed a few other young monks to finish the work. He turned and glared at young Nun Trish. How can you have let us down? How can you have let the emperor down? Your koi pond is still disgusting. Trish smiled, grabbed her spade, dug a channel from the fresh stream into the koi pond, and dug an exit channel on the other side. And within half an hour, the pond was clear, all the beer bottles were washed away, and there were koi swimming in the pond. Afterwards, she was promoted to the head of automation. Slightly funny story behind that. Trish, for those who know her here as a speaker at Devox, used to have a little bot, a little Twitter bot, named after her called AutoTrish. And whenever you broke the bill at her place of employment at the time, LMAX, AutoTrish would pop up and tweet at you. It's a great tool. Little example here, we use Chef at jClarity. Unfortunately, the code is in Ruby, which is a bit sad, but you work with what you need to work with. So all of this stuff here is about, looks like it's deploying one of our agents if the version is newer to a remote location. And it's all scripted, right? So we never have to do this again. It's all automated. I have 0 QA people in my team, in my company. I have 0 ops people, so I don't have any system administrators or DBAs or any of that sort of nonsense. We just automate absolutely everything. And it's life-changing when you do it, I promise. The next story is about the backward monk. So there was always one monk in the group that delivered his code more slowly, but wrote tests first. The other young monks would laugh and point at Simon, because Simon would always be delivering his code that little bit later, and would always have to work that little bit longer in order to finish a project, while the other monks went off to Knox nightclub and partied away. By the way, the Masters this year have closed Knox. There will be no party at Knox this year, for those who have already missed that announcement. So, where was I? So, young Simon, who was constantly berated by his peers, and one of the abbesses, we'll call her Audrey, noticed this, and started to look in more closely at what was happening with the young monk's code versus Simon's code. And sure enough, the velocity of the young monks was much faster than Simon. But on greater inspection, she discovered that the number of production problems from Simon's code were close to 0, whereas the young monks caused much, much pain for the villagers down the hill below. So by way of teaching, she took all of the young monks up to the top of a cliff, along with Simon, and gave them all these lovely little rubber duckies to go float in the water below, and said, "Right, young monks, it's your day off. Please jump off the cliff, enjoy the water." One of the monks cautiously looked over and said, "But Abbess, there are only rocks below." And she said, "Ah, yes, but by your philosophy, you'll figure out a solution by the time you've hit the bottom." Quick example, I'm no longer a fan of writing tests for everything or trying to get high code coverage, all that sort of stuff. That was a fallacy which I used to teach myself. We very much now go for testing the things that really, really matter, right? Like jumping off a cliff. So in our case, a license, this is pretty boring code, right? But we test that, our licensing server code actually works correctly. It really matters to our customers, because if we don't hand out a license to our product when they want to use it and we block them, they kind of get a bit annoyed because they damn well paid for it, right? So we make sure we've got good testing around that piece of functionality. And we probably only have about 30 to 40% code coverage across our tests for our products, and we're actually very happy with that. It's completely okay. What slide number am I up to here? Oh, not too bad. Right, another story about testing. Who here likes to write unit tests? Excellent. Who here writes integration tests? Ooh. System tests? Ah, not so many. Interesting. This story is about, we'll call him Monk Dick Wall. No, that's cruel. Let's go for who am I going to pick on today? Let's go for Monk John. Monk John was very, very famous for diligently writing all of his unit tests and gaining 100% code coverage across all of those unit tests. He was therefore satisfied that all of his code was tested and therefore perfect. And he would submit his code for his colleagues to integrate in with their application. And time again, bugs would crop up. And the master visited John and said, "John, why do you think this occurs?" And John says, "I do not understand. My code is perfect. It is 100% test coverage by unit tests." So the master took John out to a bridge. The bridge was old and rickety, but each individual plank of the bridge was shiny and new. The bridge waved in the wind over the very deep, dark canyon. And Master Hu said, "I have individually built and tested each of those planks of the bridge. Therefore, I conclude that the bridge is safe to cross. Please, John, go right on ahead." And John was enlightened. So integration tests and indeed system tests are actually, I would argue, almost more vital than writing unit tests. They're very hard to do. Integration and system tests often involve having to spin up some sort of third-party database or system or mocking something out. It's worth spending the pain and time to do it. It really is. And there are a lot of tools out there now to help you. Even MongoDB has got a tool called Fongo, I think, which is an in-memory Mongo, which you can just spin up as part of a test. If you're doing web work, the inbuilt Jetty, you can spin up that container. There's all sorts of useful things you can now use, and we focus heavily on our system testing. And we actually find by writing really good system tests that the sort of code coverage and the coverage of the smaller things underneath also get picked up along the way. Ooh, this one's deep philosophy. So one of the top young monk developers, we shall call her Tasha. Tasha was extremely diligent about documenting her APIs, coding defensively to make sure that the other evil monks' null pointer exceptions wouldn't catch her out, and so on and so forth. But she was always fearful. She was always worried that there would be a problem with her code, and she would be blamed, and she would be sent down to the villages to do manual labor. So she saw wise old Master Hu and asked him, "What can I do to make sure my code is perfect? I have written tests. I have documented the API. I have even written up a wiki with guidance to my fellow developers." Master Hu looked at her, said, "I have an answer for you." So the philosophy here is don't be paralyzed either. Don't be paralyzed by thinking, oh, every bit of code I have to write has to be absolutely perfect, otherwise it can't be released. There was an excellent Ignite talk earlier today by one of the JFrog guys talking about how they agonized and perfected over the open source component to their Artifactory tool, as I recall, and then they just kind of realized people don't actually care all that much. They're not going to sit there and look at every line of source code and check out every single edge case. So do be brave and make sure you do release software quickly. Else, do this and go find another career. A couple of small stories about performance. The first one is infinities. So a monk had unfortunately written a while loop which evaluated to while true. And therefore the program started to run, well, dare I say it, infinitely. And two elders were arguing over this piece of code. And one of them argued that the code was actually finite. There is no such true thing as infinity. And the other elder said, but look, it says while true. It will therefore run infinitely. What are you saying? So they went to Abbess Joanna and asked her opinion. Abbess, can you please give us guidance? Is this while loop truly infinite or is it finite? And she said, I will give you 1 gold star, first monk, because you said the loop was finite, and that is indeed true. Eventually the CPU will burn out. We will run out of electricity, or a meteorite will fall from the sky and destroy the world. No code loop is truly infinite. And she said, but to the other monk, I will give you 2 gold stars, because to someone like an end user, a second is an annoyance. 10 seconds is going to make them leave, and anything beyond that is an absolute eternity. When the deer is being mauled by the tiger, it does not ask whether it is 8 claws or 1,000,000 claws that is killing it. The second tale, I'll let you guys enjoy that one. By the way, you can print this scroll out and hang it up in your team. So there is this tendency in performance, or in production support teams or development teams who are faced with performance problems, to form these tiger teams. And these tiger teams would get formed at the clans, and they would grab the experts from all the different villages and all the different academies, and they would bring them together, and they would heroically stick together in tents and just work on the problem day and night until the problem was solved. And the clans and the monasteries that solved problems in this way would reward this behavior. They would clap the young monks and nuns on the back and say, "Well done, you just spent 7 days straight with no sleep and no food, but finally the problem has been solved." And they began to wonder why the young monks and young nuns left their academies and left their monasteries. So if you're in an organization that is forming tiger teams to solve problems, and are rewarding that sort of behavior, paying bonuses, maybe even a thank you bottle of wine for doing that extra effort, okay? They're actually killing you. Don't let your company or your teams do this to you. Prevention is a far better cure than encouraging the constant behavior of these tiger teams. So hopefully you don't have to put this scroll up in your organization. I'll now talk about some areas completely outside of code, mainly around documentation and such topics. So code is not everything. One particular monk prided himself on saying that I will never write any Java doc or any documentation in my code whatsoever, for my code is self-documenting. Who here believes in the true self-documenting path? Oh, there's a couple of you. Several monks, several nuns. So, the master of the temple decided to take these young monks and young nuns aside who had this philosophy and asked them to fetch 2 silver feathers from the most holy of swans over yonder. And the young monks and nuns asked him, "But master, how do we find the swan, which is rumoured to be 300 miles away through the treacherous jungles of the rubyists and the .netites?" And the master said, "Oh, don't worry. The path will be self-explanatory if you follow each pebble in turn." And the young monks and nuns were never to be seen again. Little piece of example source code from one of our products called Sensum. It's a garbage collection log analyzer. And so it reads raw data from the garbage collection log that comes out of your JVM and translates it into useful numbers and metrics and analysis. I could take any single developer in this room, assuming that none of you know how to natively read garbage collection logs, and if I threw you our code base without useful comments like the one there at the top, it would take you months, if not years, to decipher our code base. A bunch of very well-crafted, put together, and extremely long and dangerous regular expressions. And here is one tiny sample of one of the many misdirections that the GC logs can put you in. So if you really think you can have purely self-documenting code, you only need to look at small examples like this to realize maybe sometimes a bit of guidance is useful. Else you might end up in the land of the rubyists. You don't want to do that. I'll skip this one. It's the same story effectively. This koan is about the uncorrected monk. So one of the elders who technical team leads in the halls of the Flying Dove clan was distraught despite 10 years of teaching this one particular young monk, we shall call him, how cruel can I be? Call him Stuart. Stuart the young monk. And his elder despaired because despite 10 years of teaching, he would not write unit tests. He would call all of his variables x and x1. He would not document any of his code. He would commit once a month, and he used Subversion. Just awful. So the elder, in despair, went to Master Hu and asked, "What can I do with this monk? He refuses to do anything correct." Master Hu frowned and started to look very angry. Said, "Yes, the perpetrator for all of this must be punished. Most certainly." And the elder sighed and said, "How many days must I clear out the pigsties for, Master?" So leading by example is very, very important. There are a lot of senior technologists, and I suspect there might be one or two hidden in this room secretly, who have an attitude of do as I say, but don't necessarily do as I do. And I've fallen into this trap myself, berating my team to make sure that they write their unit tests, they name things properly, they take care, all these sorts of things. And when it's my turn to code, I sort of quickly knock something up and let someone else tidy up the rest. If you have that attitude, there is no way your team or your young monks or young nuns are ever going to get any better. So you really have to look yourself in the mirror and make sure that you yourself are doing all of the right things. And then don't tolerate excuses. I have seen a lot of teams fall apart because of one or two bad apples that the rest of the team will not get together and help bring up to their level. Okay? You are only as strong, your software team is only as strong as your weakest link. And in fact, a person who does not follow at least some of the basic good practices out there in the industry today causes negative work for the team, destroys morale, and it's even worse. There's a fantastic talk by a couple of Googlers called The Poisonous Apple. And I highly recommend you go find it and read it. So please do ensure that you bring the rest of your team up to the level with you. It's all your responsibilities together. This is a question about interviewing. And after praising Google, I'm now going to pick on Google. So the masters and elders at the Laughing Monkey Clan were interviewing several new monks for their introduction year. And they were interviewing two young nuns, one called Stephanie, the other one Kim. Now Kim was the sort of young nun that the interviewer really liked. Razor sharp, knew data structures and algorithms, had a master's in computer science, and blazed through the interview. Wrote answers on the whiteboard which were correct, but extremely messy. Her thinking and writing and things were all over the place. The other young nun, Stephanie, did not come from as strong a computer science background. Some echoing there, no. And she would take a lot longer to work through problems, and laboriously, step by step, would work through and eventually came, unfortunately, to the incorrect answer. And so the elders went to Master Hu and said, well, we must clearly hire Kim, for she is the superior candidate with her superior intellect. And Master Hu said, no, because I do not wish to be clearing weeds after Nun Kim for the rest of my life. Hire instead young Stephanie, who has a clear and logical way of thinking and can be taught the rest. So who here has to do interviewing at their company? Right? Okay, keep your hand up if you have puzzlers in your interviews. Do you guys do puzzlers? Yeah, things like that? Okay. In interviewing, It's great to interview and make sure that you're doing some pair programming with the person you're interviewing, or at least solve a problem on a whiteboard together with actual real working code. But watch very carefully how that person comes to an answer. The sort of person you want working in your team who's going to be dedicated, diligent, thinking about the small stuff, etc., will be the person who carefully and logically walks through each step and explains those steps along the way. They may get to the wrong answer, if it's not horrifically wrong, due to some minor mistake or a lack of understanding of the language that you're dealing in, for example, and so on and so forth. But they tend to be very, very good hires in the long term, because you can teach them the technology, they already have the attitude and aptitude to learn those things. On the other hand, if you hire the most blazingly smart people who will just look at the whiteboard and write the answer without any thinking, sometimes when those people run across new situations and new problems, they haven't got a methodology to work through it, and they become stuck very quickly. And my theory about why Google for a while was actually quite unsuccessful at pushing out products was because they had too many of those ultra smart people who didn't necessarily think of all the steps you need to go through in order to write a product or a service that a much wider audience who weren't yourself were going to use. And when they started changing their hiring policies, I forget how many years ago it was now, you started to see more things coming out of Google which were actually extremely relevant to the users that were using them. I think we're down to our last few. Yes, safety. Right. This one's fun. This one kills me. How many people have got this in their code base? Default impl. What the hell does that even mean? If you have default impl in your code, and you are not a framework author, so you're not working for Pivotal, you're not writing Spring or anything like that, please assign yourself an issue in the issue tracker tomorrow and say, we will get rid of default impl, we will stop extending the abstract, and hey, maybe we'll even be risky and do away with the interface altogether, because we know there is only ever realistically going to be one implementation. We're not framework authors, we're not library authors, we don't need to add all these extra layers of fluff. And the parallel here is the starving monk who wishes to eat. And the starving monk would often write code like this. And so the master said to the starving monk, if you can find a concrete default spoon which implements the idea of a spoon, which implements you being able to eat, then you may go ahead and eat. And unfortunately the young monk died on the way of starvation of trying to find the spoon. If only he had just used the nearest concrete class to hand his hands. The last tale I have, I believe, pride. We're full of pride in this industry. And we have a strong tale of this. Yes, sorry, I almost forgot this story. So the young monks and young nuns of the crawling spider clan often wrote their own frameworks. They wrote their own logging framework. They decided that GWT or struts wasn't quite good enough, so they wrote their own web framework, so on and so forth. So wise Master Wu decreed on day 30 of this that from now on in, each young monk and each young nun would sew their own clothing, grow their own food, make their own water out of air, so on and so forth. And the young monks and nuns were quite quickly enlightened. It is far, far better to take an existing library or framework and adopt it to your needs and contribute back to that library or framework for the betterment of everyone else. So at JClarity, we spend roughly between 10 and 20% of our time contributing back to the open source projects that we rely on. And when we find things that don't work for us, instead of writing our own, which is really, really expensive in time and effort and everything else, we actually help the original authors modify theirs in a way that benefits us and benefits hopefully others. There is one exception to this. Like everybody else, we have our own logging framework. Because hey, why not? Who here's got their own logging framework as well? Yes, they're great fun to write, aren't they? You know, because logback, SLIV for J, Java util logging, and log for J just aren't really worth it. So that was the last of my fables. I hope you are all suitably enlightened. And I have about 10 minutes for questions or comments, should people wish, if you haven't all fallen asleep. Any questions out there? Yes, sir. So the question is about code contribution. You don't want to be forced to wait because your contribution to a third-party library hasn't been integrated and pushed back yet? Yeah. So the way we get around that is we do have our own private fork of that third-party library, which we hold temporarily in our own Maven repository, and just use that until the third-party library then comes in and overrides it. And it usually happens within a space of 3 or 4 weeks at most. Yeah, so that hasn't been a problem for us to date, so it'd be interesting to find if other people do get stuck on that. Any other questions out there? Yes?
Is continuous delivery imaginable with 30% of code coverage?
Is continuous delivery imaginable with only 30% of code coverage? I believe it is. I believe it's not really about a percentage of code coverage, it's about what code the code coverage covers. So we have a lot of code which are very much edge cases or deal with administration screens in our user interface that only we ourselves use internally, which quite frankly should not be blockers for me to ship my product out every week. But yes, you should, and I completely agree, you should set very strict definitions of what code coverage and what tests you should have before you can safely say, yes, we're going to deploy every day with the continuous deployment button. So it's can be a fine line, and we have sat on the wrong line of it, you know, a couple of times, and it's hurt. Because when you follow continuous delivery, if you deliver something bad to your customers, you find out about it pretty darn quick. Anybody else? No, I don't think so. Great. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoy tomorrow. And if you like the talk, don't forget to be enlightened and hit the nice green up arrow.